Not gonna lie, whenever I do story playthroughs, I trade intelligence for hype, because it's hard to stay analytical when Kuro Games is making bangers like this. But call me Timu Cristoforo, because I too am a story enjoyer. So when I went back to replay it all, who are you? What is this? When did this happen? Where is she? Why is this even all happening? That's been me this past weekend and some, just trying to piece together the space-time bending jigsaw of a story that could be Wuthering Waves 2.4. Not that I'm complaining though, it's great. I don't need sleep, I need answers. I need to determine where in this swamp of open mysteries squatteth the toads of truth. And I think I've managed to piece together some truths. So here's my thoughts on what's happening in Wuthering Waves 2.4. And as a footnote, any and all analysis here is completely subjected to being wrong. And 9 out of 10 times, it most likely is wrong because I'm making predictions on an incomplete story. Nevertheless, all I'm trying to do here is hopefully get you more hype for the next act with some food for thought. Although based on this video's length, it's more like a buffet for thought. So open up, here comes the jumbo jet! Now there's plenty of things to cover, but let's tackle these mysteries based on story chronology. So for starters, why don't we first try to answer what happened at the Avinoleum? My theory? A battle took place. When Rover went up to the Avinoleum, he found that there were some traces of resonance energy discharge everywhere, and Abby comments how this place looks like it was just bombarded, with Cardathea's residual frequencies being in that mix. Thus, I'm speculating that there must have been a big confrontation that took place here, or some sort of event which involved an intense clashing between multiple frequencies. And who were the parties involved? I'm thinking it was probably between Cardathea and the Fraxidus, seeing as they're the ones she has immediate beef with in 2.4. Perhaps she went to Septimont because of them. But what's interesting is that if they did battle here, notice how clean the area looks, i.e. the lack of destroyed structures and debris. To explain this, what I'm thinking is that the Fraxidus only came here to taunt Cardathea into coming to Septimont under threatening guise. After all, Cristoforo needs his actors for his play. Nevertheless, whatever did transpire there, Cardathea found herself in Septimont after. Whether she traveled there herself or was taken there against her will, hard to say right now. But what I am confident in was that there was a confrontation that took place up at the Avinoleum. Now that we've established what might have happened in this floating library, let's see what we can unravel in terms of what the hell has been going on in Septimont. Currently in Septimont, I believe there are two realities existing, the present realm and the past anomaly. Even Rovers recognize this, believing that when he got transported to the bloody Aegon, he felt that the real world overlapped with the anomalous one, which implies that the two realities are tangling, but that's its own topic for later. Right now, I want to acknowledge that there are indeed two realities existing in Septimont right now. And these two realities operate in the same time frame too, since both take place during the Great Aegon. What I mean by that is that it's as if they took a snapshot of Septimont today, rewinded the years, and pressed play. So whilst the two realms are set in different periods, they move at the same time. For example, if it's 12:15 on the 22nd of July 2025 in Septimont, then it's 12:15 on the 22nd of July 2005 in the Anomaly. My evidence of this simultaneous existence? This is how it is in the script. I'll save the script topic for later. Additionally, I'm quite confident that the term anomaly, mentioned by multiple characters in this patch, is all referring to this artificial realm that Cardathea is inside. But if you want the main evidence, here's Cardathea herself referring to her Septimont as being an anomaly. So in consideration to all I just said, yes, I indeed suspect that the Septimont Rover is in is the present one, whereas the one Cardathea is in is the anomaly. I suspect this because when Rover sets off to Septimont, Cantarell details how right now there's a Great Aegon that's taking place. Furthermore, if Septimont looked as bad as it did in Cardathea's, there is no way in hell Cantarell will talk about Septimont as if nothing crazy has happened. Cause look at that place. Hence, Rover's in the real one. Now as for Cardathea's Septimont, it's a Septimont that's set back 20 years, based on how she mentions that there are facilities and records here that have been rewound nearly 2 decades back, but we can dig a little deeper into its attributes. One thing that defines this dimension is the notion that the anomaly probably acts like a sonorosphere. Cardathea cannot leave the realm even if she wanted to, because look at what's surrounding her Septimont. A mist. When Cardathea first meets Lupa, she mentions how since she arrived in Septimont, all of it is cloaked in mist. And this mist is essentially an inescapable cage bar. Yes, inescapable. Unless turned off by the creator maybe. Because when Cardathea's Lupa is explaining her exhaustion, she mentions how she's walked for so long, for so far, but she still can't leave this city. Hence the anomaly acting like a sonorosphere, because physically it's inescapable. Another thing that defines the anomaly? It's different from reality. Remember, an anomaly is something that deviates from what is standard, normal, or expected. Now of course, for a reality set in the past to exist within the present, that in itself is already an anomaly. But I think we can go deeper than that. Because whilst this realm is a Septimont from 20 years ago, this is a Septimont that's been engulfed by the dark tide, thus deviating from the normal, an anomaly. I mean, just look at this place. All we see is tidal blight, tacit discords, and a lack of survivors in the arena because Cardathea struggles to find any. And honestly, I'd be surprised if anyone was alive, considering that their Guardian Echo got corrupted. Like, who the hell can stop that thing? Thus, I believe this anomaly is a what-if scenario of Septimont. What if Septimont 20 years ago got swallowed up by the Dark Tide? Finally, the actual entrance of this anomaly is probably located in the arena, because when Rover is trying to track down Cartathea, he mentions how he can feel the anomaly's source close to the city, but can't pin down where exactly. Additionally, Cristoforo was last seen in the arena, so it makes sense that he'd want to personally manage the health of his anomaly. And yes, I am implying that Cristoforo is most likely the mastermind behind the anomaly. So let's talk about Cristoforo's forte. Firstly, let's just confirm that Cristoforo was the one who indeed created this place. If you listen to Cartathea's entire confrontation with him in the anomaly, yeah, I don't think I need to outline the evidence. Basically, she accuses him of plotting this tragedy, to which he humbly responds by mentioning how he wouldn't take all the credit. After all, Cristoforo only sets the stage, and then the actors do as they please. So it's probably valid when he mentions how the architects of this tragedy were the Septimontians themselves. But alas, he is a credit to it. Now let's go over the description of his ability, which will help to connect the dots even more. As Frolova has revealed, her associate can weave fate and stories, and Rover thus concludes that his forte can influence how things play out in said mediums. So when Cristoforo is describing his anomaly as a collective murder so entertainingly woven with blood on every hand, this just sounds like him glazing the outcomes he has manipulated, whereby it led to a Septimont that is not only engulfed by the Dark Tide, but engulfed in human discord. Now as to which came first, the Dark Tide or the bloodshed, I can't ascertain, but both suck regardless, and it was Cristoforo's machinations that caused this. Anyway, now that we understand his forte, what does it look like in action? Well, for starters, he'll need to set the stage, and I suspect that's where his bird friends joined the stage production. Because when you look at the vision of Cartathea confronting Arsinosa, you can see various black birds scattered throughout the background, and when Rover's suddenly transported to the Bloody Aegon, the frame is invaded with black birds before he enters the new realm. So my theory is that the black birds are the ones that conjure this dimension. Furthermore, I strongly suspect Cristoforo's birds are emitting the mist too, hence why you see them amongst the mist. Yep, we be creating realities from feather farts. Crazy. Additionally, when Buling's trying to find the source of this anomaly too, every time she gets close, it slips away like smoke, which either indicates it disappears into thin air, or it just very quickly flies away when something approaches it, like a bird. Hence why I believe the birds are involved in conjuring the anomalies. But then how does Cristoforo actually influence what's happening in these dimensions? Well, I suspect what he does is that he writes down the story in his red book, and from there, the story manifests as some kind of sonorosphere whilst the page burns away. And yes, I believe the red book of his is the manifestation of his forte, because I don't think any normal book opens up like that. Come on. But I also think the dude can just use it as a normal notebook too. And this is something I want to emphasize because, as we'll come to later, I don't think anything and everything written in the book is to be manifested. Maybe Cristoforo really does use this book as if it's a script book, to simply jot down what will take place. I mean, he's a very literary guy. But alas, I'll devote the script to its own section, because I definitely have some thoughts on it. Still, when I've mentioned all that, goddamn, that sounds like a terribly OP forte, being able to create realities that follow your visions accurately. But don't worry, it has limitations, and I think we can go a step further and highlight what those limitations are. And yes, I am sure there are limitations, because even Rover believes so. Because if Rover could literally bend the fabric of reality, the Fraxidus would have achieved their goals long ago. So either Septimont exists outside of reality, which cannot be, because clearly Septimont is a very real place in the world of Solaris 3, or his abilities have limits. So let's investigate those. Now, as to what those limitations could be, here's what I suspect they are. 1. The anomaly must be derived from an existing event. I believe Cristoforo cannot simply manifest an anomaly out of nothing, i.e., he can't just conjure some random story he writes into reality. He has to have a template that he can use. To quote Frolova, even the wildest imaginations draw from what already exists. So it is with this story. It follows a template, and even its creator cannot escape its confines. There's not really much else to elaborate here. Cristoforo's anomalies must be derived from an event that has existed, and he can't create anything new in it either. He must simply make do with the cards he was dealt within that event. So in this case, Cristoforo's template is the Septimont's Great Aegon from 20 years ago, and in using the stage elements available to him during this time, he has manufactured a version of Septimont where it's been swallowed by the Dark Tide and everyone's murdered each other. Which, understandably, can raise some eyebrows because I'm implying that there's probably something that existed those decades ago in Septimont that could create the Dark Tide. But again, I'll get onto that later. Now on to the next limitation, and probably the most key. Number 2, whatever Cristoforo creates in the anomaly, stays in the anomaly. What I'm speculating is that it's all fiction at the end of the day. If Cristoforo were capable of even making the smallest of fictional outcomes reality, I still think that would be wildly OP. But if anomaly creations do not affect the real world, I still think this could be a powerful ability because, if you've watched Naruto, you know how powerful a convincing illusion can be. There's still a valid use case for just entrapping someone in a reality you've created. Honestly, I think it's fair to think of Cristoforo as being a Blondie Itachi, if you consider the crows and the illusions. Anyway, I think that covers what I can theorize with Cristoforo's true forte, but I got a good feeling there's probably far more to him than meets the eye, and we'll probably see that as we get through Septimont. Alright, going back to the Anomaly now, Cristoforo specifically set this reality to be set 20 years ago during the Great Aegon. So I guess the big question is, why? Crazy how I actually think we have enough information to make an educated guess on this, because we do know of a certain someone who appeared and disappeared during this Great Aegon too, namely in its second day. That someone, I'm pretty sure, is Mya, a resonator of great mystery in Septimont's patch, and someone who shares an overlapping connection to our furry gladiator, Lupa, literally. And I'm certain Mya is the one who will bring the dark tide to Septimont. So for this next topic of discussion, let's see what we can unravel about her. I'ma start off by saying, all the details I outlined about Mya is real, because in the script there is a section called Source, and I suspect this is referring to the template that Cristoforo used to create the Anomaly. And in this source, you can find the whole scene of Mya captured here, thus all the details revealed in the scene about her is truth. So Mya, what's up with you? Mya is a gladiator hailing from Raguna, and yes, she has beliefs for the Sentinel too, but before coming to Septimont, she likely came from a poor upbringing, evidenced by her description in the script where it outlines her lowly origins. Even before the Great Aegon, Mya was infamously known for how unhinged she was, demonstrated in her seeing hallucinations and having fits of hysteria. But at least she was good at fighting, really good actually, but mentally she was in the gutter. Was her negative mental state due to the trauma of the blood sport of gladiating? No. In fact, if circumstances were more ideal, she would have loved being a gladiator, and she loves the glory that comes from it too. So why is she so mentally tortured? We'll get into that a little later. Mya's mental state would get so bad that she was often seen crying in the lounges, and she also struggled to connect with audiences. Basically, she sucked ass at the social side of gladiating, probably because of the consistent mental damage she was taking. And this all certainly leaked into her self-confidence as a gladiator too, as we see her trying to reassure herself that things are alright, they're fine, and that it hasn't all been bad thanks to the fans she's met. Yes, in spite of everything, Mya still has quite the fan base, which is due to her battle prowess. People love watching her fight, and they're rabid enough to bury her manager in complaints if he benches her. Must be that Moai gap between the depressed quiet girl and the crazy fighter which makes her so attractive. Anyhow, yeah, the fighting side of gladiating was all she was probably good for, and her abilities make sense considering how Mya spent almost all her time out of the arena training. She devoted herself to honing her craft. She was so good that before the Great Aegon, she claimed the title of the Bloody Aegon, which was a little battle royale, and even received Arsenos' blessing, which is not only a huge honor in Septimont, but is also a great testament to her strength. It's nice to see her trading dividends are paying off, albeit the mind break, but why? Why does Mya devote herself to getting stronger so much? Well, in a sad monologue, she mentioned how she needs to be better, much better, in order to not let anyone down. She even goes as far as to pray to the Sentinel for this. But who is she trying to not let down? Maybe it's the people she's trying to financially support back in Raguna, since we know she comes from lowly origins. And Mya has openly stated that she needs the money, so much so that she can't treat gladiating like a hobby. So the above theory could check out. Nevertheless, Mya is an extremely capable fighter for sure, and yet she acknowledges she has limits and mentions this is as far as she'll go. I mean, it could just be her lacking self-confidence in her own abilities, hence another reason why she trains like a madman. Or maybe she was talking about her progress in the Great Aegon. After all, she did disappear halfway through it. Honestly, Mya's a repeat offender when it comes to disappearing from Aegons. In a past Aegon that she had participated in, she had actually won the championship, but disappeared before claiming the reward. Still, in the case of this Great Aegon, what would compel her to run? With all her accolades, she seems highly capable of crushing the competition. Sure, there's rumors going around that she got pressured from the match fixing and thus ditched, but I don't think that's the case. I think when she was mentioning this is as far as she'll go, she was talking about her mental state, not her progress in the Aegon, not her own abilities. Her mental state that was at the time being affected by the Threnodian. Oh yeah, our mind-breaking serpent's back at it again to mentally torture yet another cutie. And it's crazy how that's canon too. I'm extremely confident that Leviathan's existence was what was causing Mya's mental ruin all those years ago. If you look at the script on Mya's scene, there's a big bold line outlining how Mya is haunted by maddening voices that whisper constantly. And what entity is so infamous for delivering whispers with the intention of breaking someone's soul? Leviathan. It did it to Cantarell's family, and it tried to do it to Fleur-de-Lis. If you need more evidence, just read the script further. The whispers incessantly reminded Mya of her failures, her lowly origin, and the disappointment she brought to her fans. This is the Threnodian literally trying to break her spirit, and no matter what Mya does, even covering her ears for example, the voice is still thunder in her mind, refusing to fade. Considering all that, hell yeah, the mental crash outs are justified. Who wouldn't be unhinged, hysterical and schizophrenic after enduring all that? Thus, I suspect this is why Mya had to leave the Great Aegon halfway through, because eventually she was no longer Mya. Remember, once the soul fractures, the mind will follow until only a puppet remains. That's the Threnodian's mind break process, and I heavily suspect that when Mya was wondering how long she could last, she was referring to her mind. But whilst it's pretty clear that the Threnodian had been messing with Mya back then, how did the Threnodian even get to her to begin with? Because usually you only hear the Threnodian's whispers if you are or are trying to be the Blessed Maiden. So from here on, we get back to speculation territory. Now, do I think Mya was the Blessed Maiden before Cardathea? No. Mainly because the Blessed Maiden is an existence that holds great religious significance to Raguna, so I doubt they'd let her go out to a land which openly does not revere the Sentinel, nor would they even allow her to go out. So then how did the Threnodian even get to her? Honestly, what I'm about to say is completely coming out of my ass, because there hasn't been anything in the first act of 2.4 which clues us onto how this came to be. But here's my theory. I suspect in her desperation for strength, Mya had gone to an external group, probably the Fraxidus, who promised her power. Power being in the form of Leviathan's blessing, or maybe the Fraxidus came to her, seeing her as easy prey for their experiments. Anyway, I also suspect she got in contact with the Leviathan during her days as being a gladiator, because in the script, it outlines how the people who once shouted her name from the stands, laughing in celebration at her victories, gave her strength in the early days when she first stepped into the arena. But now, everything had changed. This implies that there was once a time in her gladiating career that she was really enjoying herself, but alas, she could not treat it as a hobby. Perhaps her enjoyment was not yielding enough wins, and thus she had to change that. She needed more power, and maybe her incessant training wasn't making the cut. And then from there, once she did get in contact with the Threnodian, I suspect it may have given her a major power boost along with some unwanted voices, hence leading to the Mya we saw in that memory, someone who's very strong but also very depressed. Now, since I am theorizing that Mya did not resonate with Leviathan naturally, I believe she got to it via artificial means, because as I said at the start, the only people who have ever heard Leviathan's whispers were either the ones trying to be the Blessed Maidens or the actual Blessed Maiden herself. But what does getting to Leviathan look like via artificial means? Did she take a pill or something and then that did the trick? My theory is that she got in contact via a literal item, the helmet, or rather, the gem on the helmet. We've heard absolutely nothing on the gem, but I know it's pretty important based on the trailers we've seen so far. In the Summer Games trailer, you can see Frolova holding it dearly, which doesn't say much, but clearly it's important to the Fraxidus, and the Fraxidus do love anything to do with Threnodians. Or maybe it's just important to Frolova, and the specific connection between Frolova and the gem, I'll get to later. But the more powerful pieces of evidence for the gem are in the story trailer. When Mya's crying, her tears form into the gem, which you could see as just being a convenient transition use, but the way I see it, it's tying her sadness to that gem. The sadness which the Threnodian is primarily causing. Furthermore, when we see that inverted tower covered in tidal blight, you can see a familiar looking gem dissolving into the tower, as if the gem's power is the cause of all that tidal blight. And that would probably only happen if the gem contains some kind of remnant of the Threnodian. Okay, well, that's a cool jewelry, bro, but where did it come from? Remember how I wanted to expand on Frolova and the gem's connection? Well, here it is. I think that gem comes from a world beyond Solaris 3. Namely, it's from the dimension that Frolova is associated with, the world beyond. My evidence? During Frolova's appearance in the story trailer, you can see the gem shining as Cristoforo highlights the details about her netherworld, as if the gem's origins are from there. And considering the gem's purpose is to contain the frequencies of a godlike entity, it makes sense for something that powerful to come from off-world. Very interesting. My fake insight is indeed nuts. But can I answer how did the Threnodian even get in there? Maybe. I believe that the form of Leviathan that's active during this time is when it was assimilated with Imperator, because the last time Leviathan was just being exclusively itself was back in Resonator's very early days, and 20 years ago is too recent for that to be the case, hence Leviathan being the fake divinity during this time. And being in existence of both Threnodian and Sentinel, I suspect that it was also capable of both their abilities too, namely splitting and merging. So with the ability to split, I theorize that it split a part of its form into the gem. Or maybe the gem is some kind of Threnodian egg, i.e. there's a baby Leviathan in there. In any case, the main point is, I think there's some lesser Leviathan inhabiting that gem. And with the gem containing a piece of Leviathan, this is how Mya hears its whispers. But then why would the Fraxidus even give her such a thing? What are their intentions with Mya? Because they're not helping Mya out of a charity case, that's for sure. Well, based on the motives from the Dark Mya's design, I suspect the Fraxidus wanted to see if they could artificially create a Threnodian Resonator, and thus start the Dark Tide and Septimont through them. Because at the moment, it's basically a gacha in terms of fighting Resonators that resonate with a Sentinel or a Threnodian. Thus the Fraxidus thought, let's try and circumvent that gamble with this experiment. And yes, even with a partial Threnodian, it should still be possible. After all, Jinzi is technically a partial Sentinel Resonator, since Huanglong's Sentinel split itself up to govern each city. She's like 1/7 of Jue's true power. So yeah, all this is very, very deep into speculation territory. This is quite the new theory to investigate indeed. Mya, the artificial Threnodian Resonator. To remind everyone, the dark tide is a wave-worn phenomenon used by Leviathan as part of its destructive nature. Thus, you can't have some average Joe Schmo who's been talking to Leviathan be the one that brings about the dark tide. They need Leviathan's power to do this, not its whispers. Thus, why the Fraxis were probably trying to make Mya into a Threnodian Resonator, so they could jumpstart this disaster without waiting for a proper vessel. But then that begs the question, if she successfully transformed, would she even be able to? Oh yes, because when Cardathea releases Mya from the experimental unit, there's a surge of dark water that comes out along with tidal blight growing around the area, and that looks like dark tide activity. How I see things playing out is that the moment she becomes the Threnodian Resonator, she triggers the dark tide, and then to rest and regenerate, that's how she ends up in that Incubator unit which Cardathea finds her in. So, now that we've confirmed Threnodian Mya being the one who is actually capable of triggering the dark tide, let me expand into why I specifically outlined Mya being an artificial Threnodian Resonator. Yes, she didn't naturally resonate with Leviathan, but her design motive, I believe, also strongly suggests her being an artificial Threnodian Resonator, because her design is corals. The whole purpose of coral is to provide essential food, shelter, and breeding grounds for fish. It's essentially an all-rounder habitat for them. And do you know what Leviathan is? A fish, albeit a very special one. Hence why I say she's an artificial Threnodian Resonator. Sure, she can't resonate with it, but at least she can make herself a suitable habitat for it. She can enable Leviathan's power to dwell within her without resonating with it. Furthermore, if she were a proper Threnodian Resonator, then she would attain attributes that reflect it, much like how Jinzi gains dragon features to reflect Jue, and Cardathea has her crowns and thoughts to reflect Imperator. So you'd expect Mya to look like a serpent fish, but no, she's just coral. Lots of coral. So yeah, Mya, when she looks like this, that's probably when the Threnodian is fully dwelling within her. And I'm pretty sure there's one more form that goes full on Tacit Discord Mya, but I'm very sure they're saving that for the next act. Although, looking back at things, yeah, what the hell is this theory? Oh, whatever the case, I'm pretty sure Mya's new form is something very Threnodian related. And thus, I heavily suspect it was through her that Cristoforo was able to trigger the Dark Tide in Septimont 20 years ago. Because how could you have a Dark Tide in Septimont back then without a Threnodian presence? Remember, Cristoforo can only make changes with what is available in that past. So whatever Cristoforo changed back then was probably to ensure Mya's fate was influenced somehow. Before I go elsewhere, I want to show off one more thing regarding this experiment to create an artificial Threnodian Resonator. The incubation chamber. I'm sure this structure already existed in Septimont because I don't think Cristoforo's influential powers are potent enough to influence Septimontians to build an entire structure within the span of the Great Aegon. Thus, it has to be a structure that has already existed. And this experimental unit serves to do one thing: facilitate the Threnodian's growth in Mya. Because Cardathea describes the experimental unit as an incubator, which are essentially just protective baby chambers. And when Cardathea is trying to get to Mya, the unit activates its defense systems in order to protect their Threnodian. On a side note, when Mya emerges from the incubator, she's described as looking like a newborn, and this really strengthens my theory of the Threnodian that's within Mya being a smaller or baby version of the real thing, thus needing the chamber in order to continue its growth. You know what? Maybe Mya disappearing from the Great Aegon was actually her ending up in that experimental unit, but then maybe Cristoforo changed Mya's fate by, I don't know, changing her mindset? Because perhaps why the Dark Tide didn't happen back then was because the Threnodian might have rejected Mya, or maybe Mya's vessel couldn't handle the Threnodian. Well, whatever Cristoforo did to change Mya's outcome, we'll probably find out in the next act. All I can do is speculate. But now that I'm saying all of this, maybe Mya had been aware of what was going to happen to her and Septimont the entire time. So perhaps to stop it, she might have EOS'd herself. Honestly, maybe she's been in and out of that experimental unit even before the Great Aegon. Alright, if I keep going, I will go beyond knee deep in this rabbit hole of speculations. Whew. Alright, nearly done with Mya. Bear with me. Because everything I've talked about so far has to do with the Mya from Septimont 20 years in the past. And if Cristoforo plans on erupting the Dark Tide in today's Septimont, how could a fictional existence from 20 years ago do that? My theory? Through the Threnodian's assimilation ability. The primary limitation I theorize around Cristoforo's forte is that ultimately it's all fiction. The reality of a dark tide engulfing Septimont will always remain fictional, unless there's something that can make it reality, and that something is Leviathan's assimilation abilities. If Leviathan can fuse himself to Imperator, who says it can't fuse fiction to reality? We're talking about the capacity of godlike beings. Who knows what they can do? And honestly, it's the only superpower that I can think of right now which is capable of doing this. The fusion of two realities. This is how the dark tide will be brought to Septimont. And as Rover enters the City of Glory, there's already evidence of this happening. Let me lay it out. First off, just as Rover's entering Septimont's hemisphere, Abby expresses how her heart started racing like crazy, and she's played with an uneasy feeling, like things here are all tangled up somehow. This to me reveals not only a symptom of the tangling, but also the literal evidence of it. The symptom, echo frequencies becoming unstable. The evidence, the feelings and visions of the tangling. Let me keep going. The symptoms I outlined are further displayed when Rover notices how every echo in Septimont exhibited the same unstable frequency, as if something else is interfering with its stability, like another dimension, tangling into our own. Remember Into the Spider-Verse, how everyone was glitching because all their realities were coming into one? It might be something like that. Perhaps an echo experiencing an unstable frequency means an arrhythmia to them, hence Abby's elevated heartbeat. Moving on, as for the evidence of tangling realms, one is seen when Rover is literally taken to the bloody Aegon during his finals match. Here, he mentions how this experience definitely wasn't a dream. It was like the real world overlapped with the anomalous one. Additionally, Booling mentions how Rover could be the one that breaks the deadlock, which I believe implies the state of the two realms tangled and in a deadlock at that moment. But when I read this again, maybe whenever Cardathea is fighting Mya, he temporarily stops the merging since the Threnodian can't focus on it and instead has to focus on fighting Cardathea. Anyway, this next evidence I'm about to say could be a tad on the stretch, but Forolover does point out how time is still on Rover's side for now, perhaps implying that since the realms have yet to fully merge, Rover still has time to do what he needs to do. Further evidence of the low tangle levels is that no one in Septimont seems to notice these weird sensations, which implies that the effect is still small for now. Finally, another piece of evidence, which you'll have to head out and explore Septimont to see, is that on the outskirts, you can see clouds which display this dripping black ooze. The ooze, I suspect, is what the dark tide looks like. After all, in its description, the dark tide manifests as a dark swirling mass of clouds that gathers and eventually breaks. And that black ooze is probably the dark swirling mass breaking. So, now that I've shown that there is a tangling between the two realities, am I able to justify why the tangling is even taking place? Because if I think about it, what's stopping the two realities from completely merging immediately? Perhaps it's simply just natural causes from Leviathan's abilities that prevents assimilation taking place at an instantaneous rate, or it could also be that because the Threnodian is still a junior, it can't exert its powers with the same effectiveness. Another matter to think about, what would prompt Leviathan to even do this merge? My theory, it recognizes it's in a fake world. Or maybe, much like Rover and Abby, it recognized there was something amiss with its world, and thus, in noticing this, it exerts its power to assimilate the anomaly and reality. Nevertheless, realities are merging, and if there's anyone in Septimont that's felt that the most, it's Lupa, with her in and out glitches between herself and Mya. I realize I have yet to ever talk about Lupa at all in this entire dialogue, but in consideration to just about everything I've been theorizing so far, I suspect that Lupa and Mya are the same person, or rather, two sides of each other. So let's finally get into Lupa. Lupa is the final piece I wish to cover before I go into the script, so let's quickly go over what we know about her so far. She is a fiercely honorable battle junkie who has a genuine passion for all things gladiating. She's also good at both the combat aspect and the social aspect of gladiating, so much so that she's quite the celebrity right now. And her favorite gladiator to watch is Mya. What's interesting about her character though is that apparently her cheeriness is somewhat of an act, stemming not from her nature but from a force of habit. And her life before she was gladiating? That's all blank to us players. The earliest thing we know about her is that she'd been purchased by the Silvers. Finally, she's marked with Cardathea's frequency, which Cardathea put on her while she was in the Anomaly. Present day Lupa having something from 20 years ago? What? Well, Lupa has little memory of this. Cardathea's name feels familiar, that's all she remembers. And then she'll suffer from intense headaches, which to her takes more energy than fighting in the arena. I suspect the headaches are from her trying to remember who Cardathea is. I understand that the Lupa I've been talking about is the one that Rover met, so yes, I know there's also a Lupa that Cardathea met, but the reason I didn't include her in the discussion about Lupa was because I don't think that Lupa was Lupa. I think that was Mya. So with our first connection between the two characters, let's finally dive into how they're the same person. First, starting off with reviewing Cardathea's Lupa. Not only does her personality scream depressed introvert like Mya, but she also mentions how the white tidal blight follows her wherever she goes. And of course the tidal blight will never leave her, because it is Mya who's the one producing them thanks to the Threnodian's power. Furthermore, the word tidal blight is only something Mya would know, likely because she's been informed about what her link to the Threnodian will eventually bring. Even Cardathea doesn't know what tidal blight is, considering how she had to assume it meant something to do with the dark tide. Finally, and here's my magnum opus of evidence, when Cardathea mentions how the darkness once whispered in her ears, Lupa makes a face of familiarity, as if she too can relate. Because she can. Mya's been through it. Next up on the evidence board, let's look back at Rover's Lupa again, because there's something she showed which links her to Mya via dark power. And that something is the time when Lupa's spear suddenly went a little berserk. To quote Rover, it was the Threnodian and Dark Tide's frequencies he sensed in her weapon, if only for a brief moment. And the only person that has exhibited such frequencies is Mya, the same person she's been glitching between. Honestly, just about every time Lupa glitches, Rover notices the Threnodian's frequency. But outside the Threnodian stuff, Lupa has highlighted that she enjoys watching Mya's gladiator footage the most. And who doesn't like glazing themselves? So yeah, Mya and Lupa got that connection for sure. Finally, let's look into the semantics which solidify their connection. If you look at the 2.4 trailer, when Cristoforo mentions how the nature of humans is like two sides of a coin, it then cuts to a scene of Lupa fighting, and her opponent is what I very likely assume is a Discord version of Threnodian Mya, based on the highly prevalent blue scarf on her. That goes to show me that perhaps Lupa is one side and Mya is another side, but ultimately the two inhabit the one body. Another evidence which corroborates this concept of two sides is in the 2.4 story trailer. Here, as Cristoforo is mentioning how the brighter the flame of glory burns, the deeper their shadows grow, there's a scene of bright Lupa which then burns into a dark Mya. This tells me that Lupa is probably the positive side, the brightest of the flame of glory, whilst Mya is the dark side, the shadow of that glory. Now, of course, throwing around the words light and dark is very ambiguous. I'm certain I've just introduced a whole bunch of plot holes because how the hell did we get from Mya to Lupa then? Because if Lupa was a part of Mya, then they should look kind of similar, right? Much like Cartithia and Fleur-de-Lis. But clearly, these two look vastly different. So how can they be the same person if they don't even look remotely similar? Hell, how does Lupa even split from Mya? That part, I genuinely don't have a confident answer. This connection is easily the biggest contributor to my head splittings as I was writing the script. I came up with a fair number of theories, but honestly I'd be happier to wait for the next act of 2.4 to answer this. But what was common between my theories was that when Cartithia was fighting Lupa in that incubator room, I got a good feeling Cartithia used her splitting abilities to split Lupa off from Mya. Thus, Lupa was the remnants of Mya's personality, though I suspect this split wasn't perfect as Lupa struggles to remember Cartithia. Nevertheless, it doesn't take away that I still believe Lupa and Mya are the same people, and Mya was now full-blown Leviathan in human form. But if Lupa is split from Mya, how do I explain the vastly different change in personality? I do not think she'd be immediately happy-go-lucky like she is with Rover. Well, when Cartithia meets Lupa, she's basically amnesiac. I suspect Leviathan was close to taking over everything about her that relates to Mya. Thus, when being split from Mya, and therefore able to start a new life, she probably had to forge a new identity and persona in order to live, hence the personality change. Remember that little detail of Lupa in the script, where it highlights that her cheeriness is somewhat of an act stemming not from her nature, but from a force of habit? That to me sounds like she had to fake being cheery in order to seem more whole as a person. After all, she's only just a part of Mya's identity. But if Lupa was separate from Mya, how the hell does she meet up with Rover then? Because they're clearly from different time periods, and Lupa doesn't look like she's been affected by the passing of 2 decades at all. How is their meeting remotely possible? I think it's time we talk about the effects of the reality assimilation on the WuWa timeline. As we know, Cristoforo's anomaly takes place 20 years in the past, so if it assimilates with reality, that will indicate that the events that transpired in Septimont 20 years ago are actually true. To illustrate this, let's use the time when Rover tries to resonate with Cartithia and he is presented with an image of Cartithia confronting Arsinosa. Rover saw this image on the first day of the Great Aegon, and yet according to the script, Cartithia's confrontation was meant to take place on the 3rd day of the Great Aegon, which is the case since on the 3rd day, he and Cartithia were fighting side by side. So how could Rover have seen an event that's meant to take place in the future? The answer? Because the anomaly set 20 years ago is starting to become part of reality, technically, the event of Cartithia fighting Arsinosa has already taken place in Rover's timeline, because their battle took place 20 years ago, hence why Rover is able to see it on the first day of his Great Aegon in the present. Now that we've established how to read the timeline, let's connect this to Lupa and Rover's meeting. If Lupa was successfully split from Mya 20 years ago, then it would make some level of sense for Lupa to then meet Rover at present day. As the timeline would go, Cartithia marks Lupa with her frequency, 20 years pass, and then she meets Rover. Additionally, we have no information on Lupa's past before House Silver, so who knows what she has been doing. But how do I explain the lack of aging impact on Lupa since she still looks like the same as she did 20 years ago? It's because she's just a consciousness, and I'm pretty sure they don't age. Remember when we met Cartithia in the inverted tower before freeing Fleur-de-Lis? She too was a consciousness with a physical body that never aged. Hence the whole logic as to how Lupa of 20 years ago is still able to meet Rover. Lastly, because the chronology is relevant to explaining this, how can I explain Rover's transport to the bloody Aegon? Because if realities are merging, why didn't Rover end up in Cartithia's space? What I suspect happened then was that as the realities merged, Rover was temporarily taken to Cartithia's anomaly, but respective to his time, i.e. he was still fighting in a Great Aegon of present time, but it was in the reality of Septimont being engulfed by the Dark Tide 20 years ago. This adds up because if Septimont had been affected by the Dark Tide 20 years ago, it's possible the bloody Aegon never got abolished thanks to Augusta or never getting their chances to rule. Thus, why the bloody Aegon still continued to this very day in that reality. But it is evident that the two were in the same anomaly, considering he could feel her frequency more. Hopefully I explained that well enough. Alright, that's the timeline stuff talked about. Gosh, I do wonder how many of you have managed to reach this far in the video since the jump, because I finally think it's time we explore the script. This outlines the fate that Cristoforo has spun. Now I'll start off by reiterating, I don't think the details written here will happen because he wrote it down. I think they're just there for a reference of what's to come. I suspect the only place where his forte was actually used was to generate the anomaly. That's it. But then the rest of the events is what he expects will happen. So why do I think this? Why am I of the strong belief that his script was not something his forte is completely involved with? Well, let's consider a limitation of his forte. He can only influence the way things play out on already existing events. And in the script, it's got details on events that are either happening right now or in the future. So if you're theorizing that whatever is written in the script is what Cristoforo will make happen via his forte, this is already a clear contradiction, because he can't influence how things play out if they're already happening or they haven't happened yet, according to the limitations. Therefore, whilst the script is not something that manifests how things will play out, I'd say it's just alluding to how things will play out. Alright, now that I've established the script being its own thing and not from an ability, let's learn how to read it. As we can see, there are two sections, source versus fiction. Source, I believe, is what is true, and it's also the template that Cristoforo used to generate the anomaly in order for the events in fiction to take place. And then we have fiction, which is the script that details how things will play out. As Fulova has mentioned the script to only be a 3-day story since it takes place during the Great Aegon, you can read the script from left to right, with the first pane being what happens during day 1 of the Aegon, and etc. For example, day 1 of the Aegon is when Rover met Lupa. Also, I don't think there's any significance with there being no pane for a particular day. I think the panes are just simply what was written in the script. Anyhow, how do you read each lane then? I've heard people speculate that each path is a route, i.e. they are mutually exclusive from one another. For example, the second route is if Cartithea had gone to Septimont and not Rover, and the third route is if Rover had gone to Septimont with Cartithea involved. But I don't believe that's the case because usually scripts are meant to encapsulate one complete story, not multiple versions of the same story. Thus, all characters are involved in the one story, and that story leads to the expected end of the gladiator girl becoming the harbinger of the dark tide in Septimont. This end probably belongs to the pain of Doomsday. Why I think this is because when Rover opens the script for the first time after Fulova outlines this ending, we can see that the latest event does depict this, a Septimont engulfed by the dark tide thanks to a gladiator girl. This is how things are expected to play out, but who knows, there's still some hours left before the day truly ends. But back on the characters, clearly the bottom lane belongs to Rover, middle lane belongs to Cartithea. Well, what about the top lane? You could say it's Lupa, but then if that's the case, why is our meeting with her not outlined on day 1? So I don't think this top lane is Lupa. I think it's Mya, the supposed true lead of this script. For starters, if Lupa were indeed the lead, I don't think Fulova would have mentioned her as a separate entity. What I mean by this is that after she reveals something about a true lead, she then refers to Lupa as that gladiator girl. Also, considering the nature of the script is to be a tragedy, it would make more sense if it was Mya. The story starts with a girl who wished she could be a gladiator to help her family, only for her to obtain a power that not only relinquishes her joy in the sport, but also destroys everyone and everything she holds dear by the story's end. Finally, during the time we talked with Fulova, she mentions how the true lead of the story has yet to emerge. And if you look at the script during this time, we see no appearances from Mya until the third day, which thus proves Fulova's point, that the character has not appeared yet. But then, how does Mya even appear to begin with? How does Lupa bring the dark tide to Septimont? It's by the two fully assimilating. Whilst Cartithea might have split Lupa away, I suspect that Mya will try and assimilate Lupa back, thus leading Threnodian Mya to finally appear in the present Septimont, and also leading Lupa to becoming the harbinger she was destined to be. And just before we move on from characters, if you go back to the source section, I suppose you could also read each lane as being a character too. And with that being said, yes, I am suggesting that Mya's appearance here tells me that it was specifically her fate that Cristoforo changed in the anomaly, in order to produce the anomaly. One more observation on the script, but why would Cristoforo in his fiction section include events that happened in real life? Perhaps the script is all just story and hence it's all fiction to him, but my theory is because when fiction becomes reality, technically the events that are affected by the fiction become fiction. Because think about it, Lupa is an existence that should not exist if not for the anomaly. So when Rover meets with a fictional character, even if it did happen in reality, it's still technically fiction. And with that all being said and done, this, to the best of my wisdom, has been my understanding of Wuthering Waves 2.4. I'm keen to see what the WuWa team has in store for us to connect all these loose ends. And whilst they do that, how about I provide some insight into what could be happening in the next act. First off, Abby will return. Not sure when, not sure how, but in the Summer Games trailer, you can literally hear her asking what happened while she was out. Next up, Lupa will be confronting Mya. And yes, I'm very confident that snake-looking Echo is Mya, because that blue scarf is undeniable. Next up again, we'll probably get some genuine insight into what that gem is on Mya's helmet. Is it something that the Fraxis are going to take back after we cut down Mya? Maybe. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I'ma say it, Scar will return. My reasoning? Because at the moment, the Thraxus doesn't have an offensive powerhouse that can take Cardathea on. Sure, Cristoforo may be able to slither his way out of things, and sure, Florova could buy some time, but at the end of the day, both of them are still vulnerable to godly powers. So they need someone strong, and I'm pretty sure that someone is Scar. Yeah, Rover kicked his butt back in 1.0, but dude was just messing around. We do not know the extent of this maniac's might. And when Scar does return, maybe he'll be with the other two Thraxus members, just aura farming the hell out of the scene. And with Rover cornered and outnumbered, I suspect that might be when Carlotta shows up to save the day. Yes, Carlotta will most likely be appearing in the next act, because, once again, in the Summer Games Fest trailer, we can literally hear her saying, whatever's coming next will not be easy. And this sounds like something you say at the end of a patch. Speaking of things at the end, this video. Clearly, the story of Wuthering Waves 2.4 is an absolute madness, but the good kind of madness, because lore enthusiasts are having a heyday trying to piece this story together. But honestly, if I helped you get even more excited to find out what happens in the next act of this patch, bet I'm a happy man. Anyhow, this has been your boy Tomotoki, having a crack at the Millennium puzzle that is Wuthering Waves 2.4. Keen to hear your thoughts in the comments below, like and subscribe for more of your boy, and I guess before I go, in pure lore crafter fashion, I'll leave you with 3 more things that's been bugging my mind constantly with regards to my theories and speculations. Hopefully you can help me answer them in the comments below. First off, I'm pretty sure the moment Cardathea released Mya from that incubator, that's when the assimilations between reality and anomaly started. Because if we look at things from a narrative POV, after that cutscene of Cardathea releasing Mya, that's when the whole topic of merging reality starts being brought to the light. But if that's the case, how are we already seeing Lupa glitch between Mya before her release? Is Threnodian Mya just creating some kind of astral projection? But then where did they get the body for Lupa? Or did Cardathea releasing Mya affect outcomes before their meeting? Like some kind of crazy timeline skewy thing. Anyhow, I'll move on to my second thought. Secondly, if Lupa is a fictional existence and Rover stops the assimilation from going any further, is Lupa just gonna disappear? Or is it gonna be like, if it manifests in reality, it stays in reality kind of situations? Who knows? Thirdly, and finally, Cristoforo's ending script from Chacona's companion quest. Jesus, I had a heyday when I read over this, but I also read over this just as I was finishing this script, so I can't be stuffed trying to incorporate what this script is telling us about 2.4. But maybe you guys can. In any case, let's let Cristoforo read what the script is all about.
Armed with a wooden spear and a broken helmet, the knight charged at the windmill. His squire, ever loyal, trailed close behind as if becoming one with the knight. Together they charged again and again, true knights in spirit, ignoring the countless wounds they bore.
If you think about it, Lupa is a spear wielder, and if you look at Mya's helmet, yeah, it doesn't look so complete. Looks kind of broken. What is the windmill? Maybe that's meant to represent Cardathea? There's also the concept of two beings becoming one here. And finally, that last line.
Truly astonishing. Even if you took such a script, what could you possibly accomplish? Hecate.
Does Florova have a different plan in mind for everything? Guess we're going to have to wait and see. And hopefully, you guys will join me for that playthrough too. In any case, much love and take care.